Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski with Everything MSP here. Hope everybody's having a great Tuesday afternoon. It's a little chilly here in Michigan, pretty breezy, and you got winter coming in, but tis the season. So glad to have everybody here. We got our good friend Henry Washburn from Huntress. How you doing, Henry?
I'm doing well. It's a
Awesome.
nice, bright, shiny day today in Connecticut. So
Nice, very cool. What's the temp like in Connecticut right now?
I'll call it the 40s to 50s. So it's like solid fall weather. We're getting color changing trees and stuff like that. So it's getting nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're just taking a look here. We're 41 degrees right now, so it could be a little bit warmer, but
it's nice to be inside, but enjoy the scenery outside.
Exactly. So Henry, you've been with Huntress for quite some time.
Quite some time seems to be relative because it seems like a day can pass by very quickly, and
right,
a year passes by even more fast, it seems. But I've been at Huntress for about a year and a half now, a little over, maybe something like that.
Okay.
And prior to that, I was actually at Datto for 10 years. I was employee number 4 over there.
Oh, wow.
And that's where Connecticut's the home base of Datto originally.
Yeah.
And that's it was started the sales engineering team there and went into training and teaching. If anybody ever went to the Datto certified advanced trainings, I ran those and designed those and that sort of thing. And then eventually actually interesting product marketing, and then back into Huntress for sales engineering, kind of starting the big circle back, it seems.
Right. Yeah, the circle of tech, right?
Circle of life, tech, whatever you want to make it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some pretty cool stuff is in regards to security. It is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, of course, and as I like to say, even though Cybersecurity Awareness Month is really geared towards us as MSPs educating our clients and prospects about how to protect their organizations from all the horrible things that are happening out there in this world. It's also an opportunity for us in our industry, in the channel, to ensure that we're staying educated, we're taking a look at our stack and making sure that we've got things where they need to be. Because one of the biggest challenges, I think, is complacency. Often, you build that stack, you have it set to where you want to be, and that complacency can, curiosity killed the cat, complacency killed the cat, right? So, and so we're going to talk today about frameworks, and we're also going to talk about taking a look at our security stack and refining that and so on. So just to kick things off, we'll jump it over to you in that regard when it comes to the framework piece of it.
Yeah, well, so and we could do slideware or something like that. I have some of those too as well. We tend to focus on as far as cybersecurity frameworks is the NIST framework. There are a number of them out there. I personally, after investigating a couple, I do like NIST because it you can simplify it into ways that can help you. But with that being the case, let me go ahead and screen share, because I know like the topic of today was protecting 100% of any cybersecurity attack. So I wanted to get into that first, because I think that's obviously important. Let me make sure I choose the right screen. And once we jump back over here, can you see this right here? The
perfect
slideware, as it were. So this was like might have caused a kerfuffle inside our own team, because they're like, wait a minute, this is BS, and I don't think it's BS actually, because what you can do is this.
Right.
If you really want to be protected from any cybersecurity attack, is just unplug the router, turn off the computer, use paper and pencil and cash to run your company.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's been my TED talk. I appreciate the time. But
follow me for more advice.
Yeah, exactly. Follow me for more advice on here, definitely. But in reality, like you were saying, Dan, that we live in the real world and can't necessarily do that. Um, I had to do a lot of explaining of like, hey, so I know the title of this thing is saying that, but it's a bit tongue in cheek, guys. So just bear with me there. Um, and honestly, that NIST framework that we were talking about really lends itself to being able to understand what you should do. And the NIST framework, actually, we'll get into it. There's a whole system done by Sunil Yu, which is also another webinar that we're doing and hosting with
Yeah,
Sunil Yu too, that can go into all the different capabilities for people, technology, and process, and all these things too.
sure.
But just to set the stage for those people who might not know what Huntress is and does, we're actually like we started out as this is our CEO, actually. He started out in the NSA and whatnot, but we're a very we're actually a thought leader in the cybersecurity space. Um, and in this case, as you can see here, like if you haven't heard the Kaseya, or Incident K, as sometimes it's referred to, Kaseya event incident last year in July, we kind of ran point on new developments and discovered and helped a lot of managed service providers out there to be able to, even not customers of ours either, because this was such a big event, as well as
Right.
we're literally named as experts in the class action lawsuit for SolarWinds Orion, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I haven't, I don't know if I can really say much. It's all publicly available information,
Right.
necessarily in that. And this is kind of where we come from. We see all this stuff that from 1.5 million endpoints that we manage, and working with partners and being 24/7, that we can pretty definitively say that these cybersecurity frameworks are actually they mean what they say. Like, if you do the basics of following a framework, that stops a ton of different
Right.
stuff. And the reason why we like to go through those frameworks is because it narrows the scope down. This is the NIST framework here. It's 5 different pillars essentially, and in reality, you can do a ton of stuff to feed into these different pillars. You have
Sure.
the identify pillar, which a lot of, actually, what's really nice about the identify pillar and managed services is you do a lot already
Right.
um, with that, and that's because a big one of that is asset management, and that's honestly knowing what you're trying to protect is half the battle. You
Yep.
talk about like shadow IT, or bring your own device or what have you. That all that stuff is getting an understanding of what should I handle, what can I handle, what am I going for, how do I identify my security holes as well, like open ports and things of that nature.
And it's interesting is especially with a new client, often they don't know what they have. They don't even have a good grasp of what they
That's
have.
that's very true. And maybe you're onboarding a new client from another MSP, and they might, you know, you might have stuff that's left over from the old MSP that you have to clean up.
Right.
Or, as you mentioned, the end user might not even know what they have. And in reality, it's not their purview to know what they have necessarily. Like, they don't have the tools or knowledge to understand how to deal with new things coming on the network and whatnot.
Yeah.
This is what it
And
is.
it really is amazing. If you're working with you're onboarding a new client, you might have them tagged as 50 devices out there, devices, just looking at computer wise. And you start doing that onboarding, and through discovery, you find that they've got another 12, 15 computers out there. And obviously, from a threat perspective, if you don't know about those, they can be disastrous.
Absolutely. So one of the things whenever we like try to investigate more of an incident or something that we call incident reports that we send out. And a lot of times what we see is, hey, we saw this host that we do have the Huntress agent installed on, so we can do some investigation on, reaching out to another host on the network, which is not there. And that is a little frustrating to our threat analysts because they can't do any more work on that other host and understand, well, how far is the lateral expansion, lateral movement and such. And that's in and of itself is half the battle, making sure that you know what's there and you have the tools that you expect to be on there, I think is another one.
Right.
On there too. That helps with compliance. It helps with a ton of other things as well. Too. I know, like, a lot of there are partners that we work with, like, well, I have a Windows 2003 server that's the only thing that can work with this manufacturing software. And it's obviously 2003 is unsupported by Microsoft, and I think every single technical support ticket always says 2003 is unsupported by Microsoft. However, if you want to deal with it, but in reality, like, it's important to make sure that in those instances where you have these servers or workstations, Windows 7 workstations, whatever it is, that they're just air gapped. They have no connection to the internet whatsoever because Microsoft isn't running any more updates, security rollups, or anything like that on those. And so those are really good ways into a network, very easy ways into a network. And again,
Exactly.
without the identification, you have no idea if they're there, and then you don't know if you can plug that security hole or something like that.
Right.
The protect column, that's where a lot of we have another one over here. That's where the protect column is kind of where a lot of budget goes towards. That's the AV and firewalls and filtering and phishing training, which is important because obviously users are usually the weakest link.
Yeah.
You know, assuming that all the identification and management's been done where patching's worked and things like that, that becomes the user as the weakest link there. But multi-factor authentication is important. You know, there's any number of things, making sure local users don't have administrative rights, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Lots of things fit into that. But then you get
That
into oh yeah, sorry.
I would say just that human element, the human assets that are out there, I think often is overlooked. You know, many times organizations, you know, especially when you take a look at this, is we're putting someone in front of a PC, right? And it's like putting somebody in front of a wheel of a car, and you know, and how they drive that car, how they operate that PC can have a huge impact on the organization. And, you know, and those are the type of things that we need to invest time into training and just understanding, you know, that human element.
That's a very interesting metaphor, actually. I've never heard it quite like that. It's a pretty interesting one, especially when there's a car crash,
Right.
or what would I
Yeah.
consider an incident, or hopefully the car crash is when you start getting into I'll say kind of over here where something bad's happened in an incident and that sort of thing, or
Right.
where the compromise comes here is prior to detecting and responding. That's where a compromise can come, initial access somehow. Let's say it was a Windows 7 machine that had a vulnerability that never got patched because Microsoft's not doing patches, or a phishing attempt or something like that. All the protection in the world couldn't stop that.
Right.
And you have to assume that there will be a compromise because you then have to detect and respond to those compromises. That's where EDR comes into play. That's where really people are an important part of that. And that's where, again, I mentioned Sunil Yu's review of where all these NIST pillars are also related to how technology, people, and process work together too.
Sure.
On the front end of the framework, it tends to be more technologically focused, making sure you're onboarding people properly, that you understand what assets are there, updating servers, things of that nature, making sure multi-factor authentication is there, AV is installed, all the things you expect to be there are there. But once you get into a compromise, whether it's, let's say a loose, maybe some, piston timing is off or something like that in a car, where it's
Right.
something
Yeah.
that's small, but enough to cause a problem later down the line,
Right.
where its initial access is small, a phishing email or what have you. That's where you start looking at detect and respond. And that's where Huntress likes to focus, because obviously that's where you've assumed that there's somebody bad there. And now we can understand how they got there and what we deal with and how we deal with that, how to kick them out. And then
Yeah.
future, and then like kind of a roundup of how to protect it in the future
Right.
as well. Instead of just let me just roll back to my earliest snapshot or whatever, or a day ago or what have you. I think that's also a consideration too. What used to be the case, people used to not think that there was a detect and respond and just go, I had a compromise, let me go recover. When it was hard drives failing, totally fine. But what happens
Yeah.
with bad actors is they tend to stick around in
Right.
environments and try to hide and stay in there with persistence or other different mechanisms to stay inside even the backups. So if, let's say, I used to work at Datto, so that I kind of liken everything to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had you could store backups indefinitely, but you'd have like a six 1 month snapshots. Do you want to roll back to that 6-month-old snapshot because they've been sticking around there for 5 months? It's a
Right.
consideration to have. Like, would it be better to restart fresh and replay exchange data back into your exchange server, or just completely wipe the host and start fresh? Sometimes if it's 6 months of data, depends it honestly could depend on if it's worth it or not. But in fact, some bad actors, there was an incident where we actually managed to catch a bad actor, a state-run bad actor, actually, from originally started from a very good phishing campaign to this one spear phishing campaign to this one user, or two. I think there was maximum 2 users, but very specific. They had been on their machine for something like 9 months after the spearfish was done.
Oh, wow.
And in a lot of cases, like if it's Veeam or other backup solutions, that would have just been part of the backup, or you just have to start new backup chains or what have you, because it's just so old. Because most people have like a 90-day backup time locally and in the cloud. There's a lot of different situations there. But detect and respond, that's where you can start catching them early in the attack chain.
Well, I mean, how many times have you been out there in front of a prospect, and you hear, "We've never been hacked," and it almost as if they're expecting someone to be waving a flag saying, "We're here, we've hacked you,"
Exactly.
and letting you know, right?
Yeah.
Obviously,
It comes to me to think there's that meme of Homer Simpson talking to Bart. You haven't been hacked so far.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. I surround my life with memes, and that's how I express my
Me,
love for my
as
children.
well. Yeah. I was flipping through my photos the other day on my phone, and I'm like, okay, where are the pictures of the kids? Oh, there they are, between this meme and that meme.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Right.
That's we like to have fun here.
Exactly.
But as you can see, and that's kind of the difference between, and where I'll say we're at an inflection point now. We were talking about because of these cybersecurity frameworks, it requires us to ask the question and say, am I covered at a basic level
Right.
with every one of my customers?
And I think that's the biggest challenge is when you take a look at your security stack, the big question is, where are there the overlays? Where are the gaps there? Where are the things that I, had not even considered to include as part of the stack? And you need something, you need a framework, you need something to review that against. And this is where it comes from, right?
And just make sense of it all. Because honestly, there's a lot of, I'm a dirty vendor. Like, don't ask me. Like, go forth
Yeah,
and use the gap analysis to understand what you need. Now, I would say a vendor can help understand how they meet the needs that you're expecting. And that's the role, honestly, of a vendor, to be able to help answer the questions that you have gaps on.
right.
And honestly, that's where really good conversations come when we're working with prospects, like MSP, various MSPs out there. Like, I know I have a problem of whatever it is. I don't work 24/7 looking for security problems or detections or anything like that.
Right.
Well, that's where Huntress or other vendors can come and help.
And Chelsea did provide us with a link to the cyber defense matrix. And everybody, just to let you know, I have thrown that into chat. There's a link for you to have access to that.
Yeah, by all means. Now, part of that initial compromise is ideally, you want to catch it early, and before they've done damage, what's known in the MITRE attack framework, which we'll do a very high level discussion of. It's called impact. That's like data exfiltration, ransomware, encryption, things like that. So ideally, you're catching with your tools and your people early in the attack chain, so that you can A, know that they're there, and B, kick them out and plug the holes, as well as
Right.
maybe do a roundup after the incident is complete and say, what could we have done better? What was good? What was bad?
Yeah.
And honestly, that's half the battle, is understanding what could be done better, because everyone will be, knock wood that nobody does, but everyone at some point will have an experience like this.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have that process. That process is so critical because, you don't know when something's going to occur. All right. You're basically crossing your fingers and praying that everything is going to be great. And, you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to some kind of a notification, alert, a phone call, that disaster struck. Right. And you need to be able to jump out of bed and put something into action immediately. And there's no time to be able to pull this together at that point.
Right. And it's definitely, it's easier to deal with an incident when it hasn't been a full ransomware incident.
Right.
It's easier to deal with somebody just kind of moving around a network than it is to deal with data exfiltration or something like that. Like, it's because that's where you get into PII loss. If it's international, you have GDPR rules that might be violated, like all sorts of different things that are out there. That then you have to get insurance involved and incident response and all these other things too, that are expensive and time consuming, but also stress inducing, I think is, and that's ideally what you're trying to remove: stress. I have enough of this.
Right.
And obviously the last bit, and I know we've kind of, this horse might be dead at this point, is recover, being able to restore back to business production, and be able to do a roundup at the end and say, did we do everything we could have done? Did we do it right? What to change?
Right.
So I did talk about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And so this is kind of, if you saw on the NIST framework slide, there was that compromise piece. This is kind of diving deeper into that very specific compromise section, because there's a whole chain of events that are usually done when a bad actor gains access. And this is important to know. People spend years understanding this sort of thing. So I wouldn't say total comprehension is key, but understanding that there is a chain and how various tools and people and process are helping to identify, to detect and respond to these different levels, and understand how you capture that information. Initial access is obviously how they've gotten in, how those bad actors have gotten in. Execution is that malware payload. What that malware payload does it create persistence? Does it try to do privilege escalation? That's sort of the next tool set. So persistence is a malware payload that includes a way for a bad actor to maintain access, and that's how they maintain access in for lengths of time on reboot and that sort of thing. Because a lot of times when malware is initially executed, it's in memory. It's not necessarily on disk, and so they want to save something on disk to be able to be accessible all the time. Privilege escalation is obviously moving from a basic admin, or a basic local user rather, to an admin, administrative rights. When you start looking at 0 days and things like that, a lot of people are looking, well, do I get instant administrative access if I get this? Can I do this remotely, or do I have to have a local code execution or a remote code execution? Remote code execution is worse because I don't need to be in that network necessarily.
Right.
That's where understanding 0 days, at least how does one use this vulnerability to then distribute malware? That's usually what those 0 days are associated with.
Right.
Defense evasion is literally just hiding. Defense evasion, not being able to be seen by AV, by EDR, by people looking at logs, by network detection tools, what have you. And moving along the line all the way down to discovering more assets to work with, and using them to distribute cobalt strikes and all sorts of different bits of distribute cobalt strike beacons and stuff to be able to then connect back and whatnot, as well as lateral movement, like moving to other machines and other locations, and gaining more information during the collection, and command and control is cobalt strike and C2s and things like that. But then that's that last bit. All of this stuff, sometimes with a really bad actor, I guess, they can write code to be able to do all of this very quickly. But a lot of times it takes time for them to get to data exfil and ransomware and that sort of thing, because they want to try to get as much information while evading all different all the different protection systems and defense mechanisms and things like that, so that they can basically own the entire network. And when they're ready to deploy that last bit of malware to then encrypt, well, you're already screwed at that point.
Right.
And so ideally, your tools out there are to catch it early at initial access and persistence and things like that, as opposed to letting it go down the chain here.
Right. And two, let's face it, I mean, on the flip side, on the hacker side, the bad actor side, I mean, they're putting as much time, energy, and money into the process of their attack as we are, hopefully as much as we are, on how to number one, mitigate that, but also in the event of the attack actually happening, that process of walking through it, right?
And I actually would say that our job the collective job is harder because we have to cast a very wide net, whereas a malware actor, a threat actor, just has to find a chink in the chain mail,
Right.
and then they can, rip it open with a bunch of different chained up attacks and things like that, or what have you. If
Yeah.
there is, if there's RDP accessible on the internet, that's a pretty big open chink.
Right.
Easy to close that up.
Yeah.
Take an assessment. Do you really need that? Um, and plug the hole, as it were. So,
And I mean, essentially too, it's, for the bad actor, they don't know necessarily up front what they're walking into per se, right?
Yeah.
And it, depending on the scenario, I mean, it could be like Christmas morning for them, right? It's their Christmas as far as what are they opening up and uncovering here?
Right, exactly. And it's interesting. It kind of falls in line with one of those taglines that we use, is making the threat actors work for their access.
Yeah.
Instead of being something that's really easy, I could just deploy my malware, sit back and watch the Bitcoin roll in.
Right.
Being able to then come in and say, well, we've isolated the machine, so while you might have hosed that one thing, you haven't gotten the network, and that sort of thing, and understanding how you deal with that sort of business. Now, I guess now we can talk about the stack, essentially, and this I only have a couple slides, but we can talk very fully about these things. Honestly, when you're designing a stack, you also have to keep in mind your end users that you're working with, because you want to make sure that what you're providing covers, first of all, is easy to manage, so your time is relative and you understand how you're dealing with it. The resources you have know how to deal with it, and have the know how to be able to deal with all these tools that you might be onboarding. And then it's the right price for you and subsequently your customers. And all of those three types of buckets of needs also apply to your end users as well. Maybe not in security, but when you're trying to sell your business, sell your business to an end user, meaning that you're covering their contracts and things like that for IT security and IT management,
Right.
and that sort of thing. Not necessarily just selling your business, but because essentially that's what you're doing with an end user. You're saying, I have the ability to handle your IT. Here's all the things that you don't have to deal with anymore. Whether it's, you can make sure that you're being able to bill those all your clients, because you're selling to a lawyer at 15, and they can bill their clients at $15,000 every 15 minutes.
Right.
If they can't do that, they're not making money, and that's why they call you when there's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's being able to have to rely on another team that handles that sort of thing to make sure they can bill at 15-minute intervals is a great tactic for when you want to sell that, and show value to your end users of where to go. But right now we're just focusing on yourselves, making sure that your team has the ability to work with the tools, and you have the ability, the enough time to handle those tools, as well as it's the right price to be able to support and even make a profit on that too.
Right. I mean, because essentially when you're taking a look at your security stack, I mean, the days of set it and forget it, not that there was ever a true type of set it and forget it, but long ago. But
I
there's a
will say that
lot.
there's a lot of marketing fluff out there that's AI and ML will do everything for you.
Right.
And
Exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah, and I mean, there is no crystal ball, there is no magic wand, and when you're selecting a tool, you have to truly look at beyond what the capabilities are of the tool, the time investment that you're going to have in that particular tool as well. And It's not something that you just implement and move on to the next thing. You have that juggling act. You need to implement it, but you also need to continue to maintain that while you're then working on the next aspect of the layer.
Yeah, absolutely. And where we've kind of distilled at a basic level, because usually, different sales tools and companies, they'll tell you to, make it all you can eat, or different tiers or what have you. Well, in security, you have to have at a base offering that you are covered.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, then you're at risk because you're the one managing the IT infrastructure.
Yep.
And that's what is hard. It's a tough pill to swallow when you're trying to kind of win over your current client base sometimes, to say, listen, I just this is to be able to cover my own butt. I want to make sure that I have all these things in place because I know my team can handle it. I know I'm managing it properly, and I know that you will be secure. It won't prevent 100% of all things because nobody's 100%.
But
But I
wait,
will
wait,
be reasonably sure.
unless you unplug the router.
Oh yes, yeah.
Move
Unless you
back
want to
to
work in cash, which
right.
if you work in a food truck, you can do that.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but I don't know. You can do work on PO, I guess, and send checks. Um, no ACH.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh no, after you.
No, I was just going to say too. We've talked a lot about on our MSP discussion group calls, just the evolution of the cybersecurity threat landscape. And as things continue to evolve, our stack needs to evolve as well, and that's where education is key. Those quarterly business reviews are key, because we need to be having these business conversations with our clients that there are going to be changes to what we're providing as we move along, because what we're putting in place today isn't going to be the same thing that is going to help defend and protect tomorrow.
Of course, and that's I love quarterly business reviews, because what that does is you're talking to a company that has a business that understands business problems, and you can actually be very open with the problems you've had,
Right.
or the problems that you want to attack, where you see a problem with your businesses. I don't want to have to deal with incidents, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that if and when we do have to deal with an incident, we know what to do.
Yeah.
And that we can reasonably assume that you're protected.
And the beauty of those QBRs is that you can then continue to have that conversation around the responsibilities, because it's not when we take a look at cybersecurity and just everything that revolves around it, it doesn't mean that's 100% upon the MSP or IT or technology. There's a level of responsibility that has to happen on the business side as well. And if you're having those conversations, and you're having a regular QBR, you can then continue to have those conversations and talk about the compliance. Maybe there isn't any regulatory compliance that they might have to comply with, but there still should be that mindset of compliance within that organization.
Yeah, and in those QBRs, you'll be able to suss out what problems that business owner's feeling like they need to address. Whether it's something that is you can address immediately with whatever you provide, or if it's something you can say, well, I might have a person that might be able to help and understand that, or hey, I know that you're dealing with X problem. Here's how I can help relieve that stress for you, whether it's dealing with security, whether it's IT management, whether it's being a shoulder to cry on sometimes.
Right.
As much as that, sometimes does need to happen, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so as far as like what we've kind of sussed out with all the different incidents we've dealt with over the years is, and this is actually in I'll say rough sequence in terms of priority, um, is obviously you have to have people to handle an incident when it comes, because
Right.
it will come. It will
Yeah.
happen. And do you want to be the only one handling that incident, or do you need to hire on to that? Ideally, you're hopefully hiring into that. But in case you don't have that, well, okay, so that's where the various tools that you provide and purchase and use and provide to customers can help with that.
Right.
So it's people as well as incident response. Those are like my top two things that if you get nothing out of this, you need to make sure you have the people to be able to handle it, as well as what the plan is.
And plan as if that incident's going to happen tomorrow morning. Plan as if that incident's going to happen at 6 o'clock tonight when you're at home sitting down, starting to decompress a little bit, because we don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no crystal ball, and none of this is easy. If it were easy, then everybody would be doing this.
Right, exactly. And how you so we have some I'll have to dig up we have something called tabletop exercises that you can do, but it's essentially just, I used to work in competitive intelligence. We used to call it war gaming, which sounds cool, but essentially
Yeah.
it's, I have this thing that happened in my environment. How do we deal with it? And then you can have, it's actually kind of fun. I don't know if you've ever played D&D, but it's kind of like D&D, where you have your dungeon master then throws things at you as like, where like, nobody turned on the logging server, so nothing was logged. How do you deal
Right.
with that? That might be a little bit more advanced, but you can be basic and say a user got phished. They clicked on a bad thing. It executed it executed malware, and they were encrypted. How do you deal with that? Who do you talk to? Is there insurance to bring in? Do you have an IR company that you would normally deal with? Questions like that start
Yeah.
getting unearthed, so you can deal with it before it becomes an actual incident.
Right. Going back to the D&D, so we know what Henry did back in high school,
Yeah,
or
yeah. That and so actually, one of the reasons why I was called to join Datto as employee number 4 was Austin McCord was also in Tech Club, as was I, and a number of other old Datto employees.
Yeah.
And when
It's
you
awesome.
don't know anybody, like, I don't know, let's call some people that I knew in high school.
Right.
And yeah, so it was, I'll say this, not to digress too much. It was a lot of fun because in high school, because we were part of Tech Club, we had our advisor was this head of security, so we basically had run of the high school at night
Oh, gee.
and on the
Yeah.
weekends, and we had overnights and played capture the flag and all sorts of crazy stuff. It was definitely a fun time.
That's
Also, all
awesome.
around running wire, coax and networking and
Right.
whatever else, because we also did all the production work for all the sports events and things. So
That's great. That's great.
I know
So,
we digressed, but
yeah, exactly. So just the preparation aspect of it, it's not the 30,000 foot view of your preparation of an incident. It needs to be pretty granular, right?
yeah, well, so a lot of the process that you create from these hypothetical incidents can be addressed in a number of different ways. So if you know how to deal with one type of incident, you in theory could deal with a lot of different types, but you need to
Sure.
know at least how to deal with that one. um Having like, we have a checklist actually that can help, and I'll make sure that Dan sends that out as part of the part of the takeaway after this meeting. But that covers a lot of good stuff to be able to say, what do I need? Who do I talk to? How do I deal with those sorts of things?
That's perfect, because when we take a look at, you mentioned hypothetical, all right? I mean, if as an MSP you have not experienced an incident, and an incidents could be anywhere from A to Z, right? From mild to wild, and you have to think through all components of it. But there's so many hypotheticals. What is how do you plan for the hypotheticals if you've never lived it?
If you've never lived it, it is honestly, that's where you go back to the cybersecurity frameworks, because that's where you are making sure you have the right people to handle the tools that you have to make sure that you're covered,
Yeah,
essentially. Honestly, it's a solid question, but I think that's the impetus for the cybersecurity frameworks out there,
sure.
is to be able to deal with those if you've never dealt with them before. It's for a new hire or a new person starting in security and saying, what do people even need? What do people even need to do? Those
Right.
cybersecurity frameworks are kind of the basis of that, to be able to get that understanding of what you need to do and work to be able to handle it. So um, if, let's say, you've never dealt with an incident and something does happen, that's where incident response comes into play. That's where that's actual companies that deal with that sort of thing. I know there's a lot in the MSP space. There's that sort of thing. If you've ever dealt with data loss, that's usually a good, easy way to get into those examples. How would you deal with telling a customer you lost 3 months worth of data?
Right.
And everybody hates that call, but maybe you had to deal with it at some point, God forbid.
Right.
It's being able to have the right cadence of conversation, of authoritativeness, even to be able to deal with those incidents.
And and I
Just
think
being open.
too, yeah, just having these open conversations of the reality of what could happen, because let's face it, we are working to mitigate the risk. There is no guarantee. um something will happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And having the client prepared to know that this can happen is critical. There's nothing subtle about telling a customer that there was a breach, there was an incident. Those are difficult conversations.
I will say that you really should try to never say breach, because there's a lot of things associated with that legally. Incident's
Sure.
always a good word to use until an
Yeah.
incident response firm says you had a breach, and here's all
Right.
the follow-up documentation about that, because there's a
Good
whole
point.
level of fun associated with
Yeah.
that too. So yeah, always be
No,
wary about saying breach. It's like saying bomb in a movie theater or an airport or something like
yeah, exactly.
that.
So
Yeah.
when we take a look at the framework,
Mhm.
and we take a look at the 5 pillars, can you tell me a little bit about where Huntress comes into play of those 5 pillars?
Sure. You know what? I can actually stop this screen share. It might be easier, and we can, because if you want to, we can talk just conversationally.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I'm pretty good. Like, you can take this and check this off and whatnot, and
Right.
see what you got. So let me stop sharing, and we can talk about it. So I'm sorry. Repeat that one more time. I apologize.
Yeah. So when we take a look at the 5 pillars of
Mhm.
specifically, like when we're talking about NIST, you've got the 5 pillars. Where does Huntress come into play when we take a look at those 5 pillars?
Mhm. So our bread and butter is detect and respond. That is where we, initially we started out in persistence and looking to see if a bad actor uh, created an auto run that would start on reboot and, basically always have access and maintain that access. That was kind of our bread and butter. And we expanded out into ransomware canaries to see if ransomware is executed and that sort of thing. But honestly, and then into, we kind of punched into protect a little bit with managed antivirus with Defender. And so that all of that really is relative to the managed aspect with Huntress, and being able to have a team that reviews all these detections and investigates things that are suspicious to provide a true incident report that says this is malicious, you got something to do, where that sort of thing is. But our main focus is detect and respond. It's detecting when somebody's gotten access into a network and figuring out how to kick them out, and be able to respond to that, either kicking them out or being able to, recommending to reset all passwords, or initiate your incident response because this one's bad. Like,
Right.
because there's some things that we can't do, but we can tell you this is what you need to do.
And so the detect component, I think there's, maybe you can give a little background as far as what's involved in that detect component.
Ooh, yeah. So, in your term generally,
Yeah,
or so.
just
So in detect, you can have you have a lot of different things. Usually it's endpoint detection and response. That's where you have a tool that actually creates detections based on suspicious things. Then there's honeypots out there. If you want to set, let's say you put a Windows 7 machine out on a DMZ, knowing that it's going to be attacked, and you have a trigger set up. That's a form of detection. But then understanding how to deal with that information is also important. Like, okay, so I had somebody try to hack me with my Windows 7 machine out on the internet. What do I do with that? Well, is it, did they make it past that any defenses or air gap network or what have you, and be able to then come back and say, no, they did not get past. We had other tools and processes that prevented them from getting further.
right.
Or they did get through. We've kicked them out, and here's the holes which we need to plug now.
Yeah.
Maybe they did get administrative privileges because a local user had admin rights.
Right.
Things like that. Like, again, we were talking about, like, a bad actor just needs a chink in the chain to be able to then get through. They can find a lot of different things, or try to attempt to find a lot of different things. One of those things, like in managed EDR, is what we see a lot is, people do pen testing and things like that, and you want to see how your tools react and how your people react when you do that sort of thing. And that's where we, start isolating hosts and things like that to block access and whatnot. So.
And so on the response side, same kind of a general overview of where you guys come into play there as far as being able to have an impact. From a full serve perspective versus a self-serve, hey, MSP, this is the action that you need to take.
Yeah. So, so for Hunter specifically, with a response, you get an incident report. That report is verified as, like, malicious, and you can either do it manually. There's actually remediation steps in those reports, or a button that'll run through those. Now, depending on how bad it is, because we have, usually the really bad ones are where Huntress is not necessarily deployed out to an entire network.
Okay.
There are instances out there in the world where an MSP manages the servers, but not the workstations. And the
Right.
workstations are your main access point for a bad actor, because that's where users are.
Right.
And in which case we would probably see something on the server side, and we'll say, hey, you need to do all this stuff, but they've already got access to your domain credentials, to this end user's domain credentials, so you need to do IR. And that's where like incident response is a hours long, sometimes days, or depending on how bad, years long endeavor to then make sure that everything is cleaned up and understood first of all, and then cleaned up, and then eradicated. That threat is eradicated, and that's where insurance gets involved to pay with that sort of thing. And that can be a very bad instance, and that's why we always say, even if you don't use Huntress, whatever your endpoint detection response tool is, deploy it out everywhere. Don't try to be penny wise pound foolish.
Right.
Because endpoint detection tools will give you a lot of information. It's the people that are behind it that really are the powerful bits that help make those EDR tools beneficial. Because AI and ML, it's not the solution always. It's not the silver bullet that everybody makes it out to be. If you know how to use the tools, great. You're already ahead of the game than most people.
And we're living in a crazy world, right? I mean, we're living in a, from just taking a look at, the bad actors that are out there, but also we're taking a look at compliance, insurance. There's so much pressure that as an MSP, you need to make sure that you have that stack perfected as much as you can. Because the amount of liability, and I think often the amount of liability that MSPs have is overlooked. Because we talk about the responsibility of that end user on that PC and the amount of damage that as they're driving that car, they're running that PC, the amount of damage that they can do and the impact of it. Same thing goes for us as far as being an MSP. Incredible amount of responsibility as we're driving this MSP vehicle, and we might have a lot of the tools in place, but if we don't have all the right tools in place, it can be a bad accident.
Yeah, and I will say it can be a real bad accident, especially if like an MSP gets attacked, and RMM was used or something like that as to deploy malware or what have you to a bunch of end users. That's the big scare.
Right.
To be
when
honest.
It goes beyond one to one, it goes one to many, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've heard of, I haven't experienced this myself, but I've heard certain insurance companies that if an end user says that they work with an MSP, they just won't underwrite them. Like, what?
Right.
I mean, I guess, but then it behooves the MSP to show what type of process and procedure they have in place to say, you, insurance company, can underwrite this end user because they have all these controls in place.
Right.
Because I am delivering these controls. Now, that does put that risk on you to make sure that you are delivering on said controls. But it makes it so that the end user is protected, and the insurance company feels like they don't have to pay insurance out,
Right.
to pay money out. That's really the objective of insurance companies, to not pay as much.
And it's critical when we look at this, though, to continue to look at that framework and how the stack aligns with that framework in ensuring and having a level of confidence of what's being provided. I know we only have another minute left here. One thing I wanted to ask you about is your neighborhood watch.
Yeah. And I was just going to be getting to that when you were mentioning like the risk that MSPs have and that sort of thing. There is a slide that I have that I can pull up if you want me to. The neighborhood watch is basically an NFR program for MSPs to test out Huntress at their MSP sites at their own locations, just kind of eat your own dog food sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
kind of put an investment in to show. Let me share my screen just because I'll get over to that. An investment to make sure that like we trust our product so much that we're just willing to give it out for free.
Right.
We do ask that you talk with us and understand the usage and what's expected to be able to be part of the program and that sort of thing. But
Yeah, that's
it
totally
is-
fair, right?
it
I
is
mean,
totally part of that. Let me get over there. And it's just huntress.com/neighborhood, and that gives you access to be able to then try out Huntress. We also have like a 21-day free trial for deploying out anywhere and everywhere. But if, let's say, you don't become a Huntress partner, well, you can still use this neighborhood watch for up to a year. And if you become a Huntress partner, well, you still get the NFR licensing.
that's great.
And if you're already, you can talk to your partner success manager and see if you need access to this.
So simply go to huntress.com/neighborhood and complete a simple form.
Yep.
And submit that. Then somebody will follow up from that point.
Yeah. Somebody follow up and get some more information and see how we can help you deliver that neighborhood watch program and work with the Huntress systems out there. So
That's awesome. Well, Henry, I think we've I think we've reached the end of the internet. We've
it's been fun. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, no, it's always great talking with you. Really appreciate your time. I appreciate everybody joining us here today. We will be sending out an email tomorrow that will include a link to the replay of this. So be sure, if you have other individuals in your organization you want to share this with, or fellow MSPs, please feel free to share that out as well. It's one of the best things about our channel is sharing is caring, right? Helping each other out to learn, share, and grow. We'll also include a link to the incident response playbook. We'll have that out there as well. With that being said, again, thank you, Henry. Thank you, everybody else. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you all soon.
Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you, everyone.
Have a good one. Bye.